No, let's not do that. Let me jump to a later part of the text, and I'll give him a different kind of person to read, and then we'll come back and talk about those various things as it relates to this study that I want to share with you this morning. I don't know about you, but anytime that I look around the world and I get frustrated, I go back to the book of Ecclesiastes, because it's to me the great reminder book. It's the part of the Bible that kind of tells us, listen, the world's always had problems, and the world's always had darkness. And the world has always had challenges and problems and difficulties and things it had to overcome. The world has always been vanity. The world has always had this futile emptiness about it that so many people dedicate way too much time and energy towards. And so you can just go back into the book of Ecclesiastes and appreciate so much wisdom that the writer shares with us as to how it is I should navigate times like that. How is it that I can navigate all of the various times and seasons that come along in my life, and the things that I witness in relationship to the world in which I live, and how can I navigate all that and still keep my faith and the integrity of my relationship with God throughout it all? And so that's what I want to talk to you just for a little while this morning concerning. And I want to go into this text and just recognize that there are seasons that come in life, and they come and go, and they don't always camp out in just one moment in time. That there are all kinds of things that come and go. And so let me read for you the text I decided not to make Hunter read. Verse 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. There's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh. There's a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, and a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task which the sons of men are to be occupied, and he has made everything beautiful in his time, or in its time, in translations, in his time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." I suppose all of us, as we read through that text, can know a moment in our lives where we fit all of those descriptions. There have been moments in our lives where mourning was what was being occupied in my heart and mind. There's been times of laughter. There have been times where I've had to tear up that which was no longer of value, and I had to re-sew something together that was now going to benefit me in a different way. There have been moments throughout our lives where we all fit these various descriptions, and what I want us to appreciate is that so often we get caught up in the moment of season that we're in, and we might forget that there's a God overseeing all of it. That though it may feel like at times when the mourning sets in, when the time of war is there, when the time of hatred might be prevalent, when those seasons are among us, sometimes we might be convinced that somehow God has left the scene in that circumstance. That somehow God has determined that He would step away from that moment in time and leave us alone in those difficulties. But I want us to appreciate this morning that irregardless of the time or season of our life we might be in, God is always consistent and prevalent there. God's presence can be known and felt irregardless of what might be happening in the world, in my personal life, in the various circumstances that I might find myself in. And so how is it that I can navigate my life of faith? How is it that I can maintain faith when I don't know what I want to know? I want to know when the next season is, but I can't because those are in the hands of God. I want to know what the next corner might bring. I want to know what the next turn in life might present to me. And sometimes we're so occupied trying to figure out the things that we don't know that we miss out on the things that we should understand and appreciate. These times and seasons come and go for everyone, and what often happens to each of us is that we complicate life. When we try to figure out the things that God says are His. God makes all things beautiful in His time, and we don't necessarily know when that timing's going to be. We don't always know, and sometimes we don't know at all why certain events occur and the timing in which they occur and how it is that this world is spinning in the direction that it is. And so often we become so consumed with trying to figure out the unknown that we miss the known quantity. And the known answer in all of that is God. Through all of those seasons and changes, through all of those difficulties and wonderful things that happen in life, through all of the ups and downs, valleys and the peaks, we all need to appreciate that God is there. Through each and every moment that we find ourselves in life, and we sometimes make it more difficult for ourselves because we're always trying to find out the unknown. We're always trying to find out answers that we simply won't be able to understand. And we won't be able to discern or to know and to be able to define each of these various seasons and why they come and go. And here's the greater question that I'm driving at this morning. Is my faith okay with that? Is my faith in God okay with the idea that there are going to be lots of things that I don't necessarily know? Is my faith in God okay with the idea that I won't appreciate always why certain seasons hit when they do? And why is it that I'm looking for a time of love and joy and laughter, and I find myself in a cycle of mourning and hatred or difficulty and challenge? Is my faith okay with the fact that these seasons will come and go, and I've got to maintain the integrity of my relationship with God despite what season I might find myself in? Because that's the hard part. I have always contended that when things are good, it is easy to serve the Lord, right? When we're being blessed, when things are going well, when my earthly existence seems to be so peaceful and good, those are the moments in life where it's pretty simple to serve the Lord. Because I don't have all those negative distractions leading me away from Him. I don't have all of those things that are providing for doubt and concerns that might be leading me away from faith. But what do I do when those seasons change to the more difficult times? What do I do with my faith when those seasons come that I'm not looking forward to or that aren't very pleasant? And am I okay with the fact that I might not always find that answer that I'm looking for? I might not always be able to have the clarity that I would like to have in relationship to all of these seasons. And I want you to notice, though, what the writer of Ecclesiastes continues to say in verse 12. He says, I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. You can't control the seasons, right? You can't determine when they're going to come and when they're not going to come. You don't necessarily have control over the timing of events that come in our lives. So what can I do in the process? What can I do to build a trusting faith that allows me to experience joy over the sorrows and challenges? And he says the way we do that is just to produce the good that God desires from us. Verse 13, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. If you and I want to know how to maintain our faith as it relates to those seasons and challenges that we might experience, just remember that every day that I wake up and I receive the good that God has provided for me, it's the gift of God. If I've been given life and breath, if I have the basic necessities of life, if I'm being cared for in ways, that doesn't mean that everything's perfectly suited like I would like it. It doesn't mean that every situation is exactly like I would like it to be in my life. But what it is, or reminds me of, is that God is providing for me blessings and gifts on a daily basis. There are always good things happening if I'll just but put my eyes upon them and seek to appreciate the benefits of that. The church here helps a preacher in Zimbabwe who's carting water a kilometer. You and I walk to our kitchen sinks, turn them on, and the water comes. We walk outside to our garden hose and we water the flowers. And there are gospel preachers in the year 2023 that are carting water a kilometer. Now, we're about to fix that situation for him, by the way. Lord willing, we're going to send the funds that he can be able to get water to his home. Gary and I talked about that the other day. But I say all that to you to say, number one, that's a thing you're doing, and I want to always remind the church that Gary and I may have the decision-making processes that we have to go through at times, but that's what you all are. You all are going to be aiding a man to be able to have the simplicity of the gift of running water in his home. Every day, folks, we wake up with very simple things in life that ought to be reminding us that God is good. Simple blessings and things that we take for granted, things that happen on a regular basis, things that we just kind of assume that everybody has access to, and we are being blessed on a regular basis with things that some people in this world still don't experience. And so remember that all things are the gift of God. Rejoice in the things that we are being prospered in and we have benefited in our relationship with the Creator. And don't let the disappointments and the things we feel like we don't have and the things that we don't feel like we understand or know distract us from the faith in the Creator of all things. There is a trusting faith that can lead us out of the darker, more challenging times of life, and we can appreciate in greater ways the benefits that God extends to us. Notice with me verse 13, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatever God does, I want to pause there because I want you to think about that phrase. Is our faith okay with that statement? And anything that follows it, right? Whatever God does, and you put a colon there, whatever you want to do, but anything else that comes after that statement, I'm okay with. That's faith, right? That's what faith does for us. Faith leads us to appreciate the fact that whatever God does and whatever comes under that is perfectly fine with me. Because that's the kind of relationship that I have with the God of all things. That's the kind of faith that I want to have. I know that whatever God does, He says, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before Him. By the way, that sounds like a negative thing, right? Fear. Anytime you hear the words fear, we sometimes in our minds think, well, that's a negative thing. It's not a negative thing in this text. What the text really is trying to get us to simply understand is this: the times and seasons and changes and moments of triumph and moments of difficulty, and things are great and then things aren't so great, and all of those things that we experience in life are a continual reminder that there's someone greater than us who is in charge of all things. And the God of heaven should be respected and honored and reverenced continually. I am the frail one in this equation. I am the one who doesn't know all things. I am the one who's challenged and troubled. And all of those things that we experience in life should be a reminder that we depend upon God. That we depend upon the one who is greater than all of us to carry us and lead us and guide us through all of those things. Jump over into your New Testaments for a moment. I want to share a parallel thought in Acts chapter 17. In Acts chapter 17 and in verse 26. Paul had been preaching at Mars Hill on the Areopagus, and he's run into a pretty interesting group of folks. He's found an audience of people who are vastly religious. Some translations use the word superstitious, but they are a group of people that will worship anything and everything if they think it'll benefit them, right? And they're so concerned that there might be a God out there in the world somewhere that's being neglected that they had built an altar to the unknown God. We might call him the just in case God, right? Just in case we neglected one, we want to make sure that we've got an altar to stop for a moment. That's how religious, superstitious, idolatrous they had become. Paul reminds them that it was God who had made the world in verse 24. Reminds them in verse 25 that God isn't worshiped through these idolatrous mechanisms and altars that they had built. He's not worshiped with men's hands in that sense. He gives life and breath to all things. Now verse 26, and He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. The writer of Ecclesiastes said, we don't always know the times and the seasons. We don't always know why God is allowing for events to occur in the timing that He does. We don't always have the understanding that we desire. And when Paul writes to those here in Athens and talks to them, and we have this record, he tells them the very basic same thing. It's not in your hands. You're trying to worship all these gods in case you miss one and make sure that you appease all of them so that they'll make your life better, when there's only one God that's really giving life and breath in all things. There's really only one that you need to be paying attention to, and He has provided for you anything and everything, but He's also created the boundaries. He has appointed the times so that they should seek the Lord. Ecclesiastes writer said, all of these happen so that you will fear God, that you'll recognize there's something bigger and more powerful and more important than you in the grand equation of things. It's an important lesson, by the way. Sometimes our faith struggles because we put the emphasis on the wrong place. Our faith struggles sometimes because it's about me. How do I feel about this? What do I believe about that? How do I recognize these all the emphasis is about me. How do I feel about it? A life of faith can't function very well if it's always about how you or I feel about it. The question has to be, how does God feel about it? How does God react to this or to that? What does God think? What has He said concerning these things? So often what happens is we begin to question because, I don't know this, or I don't know that, or I don't understand why this occurred. And we're so consumed with all of that thought of what we don't understand, the very obvious and true things that are right in front of us often get neglected. They needed to learn to fear God through those experiences. Paul says here in this text, we need to learn to seek the Lord through these experiences, and to hope that they might grope for Him and find Him, though He is not far from any of them. When you and I struggle in our faith, when we're challenged with decision-making as it relates to our spiritual walk with God, can I encourage all of us this morning to appreciate that our choices need to be recentered upon the God and the wisdom that He shared with us. Not consumed with what I don't understand or know, but appreciate what I do know and how it has been revealed and what I can understand. Even, yes, a faith in a God when the world around me seems to just be flipped upside down. Can I suggest to you that every generation has probably looked at the world around them after they hit a certain age and don't recognize it? I don't know of any generation that's ever, you understand what I mean by that? That every generation that comes and goes, as you get older, I promise you, right? All of us, as we get older, we will hit a point where we look around in the world in which we're in, and it won't look the same. It'll look different. We didn't do that when I was a kid. Right? We never had that when I was growing up. And my point is this. That's been happening for generation after generation after generation after generation. Because the times and seasons have been doing this, right? And this. They've come, they go, they come, they go. Changes happen. The question isn't, will the world change in ways that I don't like? Yes. Will the world look upside down to me at points in my life? Yes. Will it look like the world values things that it shouldn't value and devalues things that it should be valuing? Yes, all of that is true. But will I maintain my trust and faith in God despite all that? Verse 16 of Ecclesiastes 3, moreover, I saw under the sun in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. The writer of Ecclesiastes looked to the places of judgment and said, wait a minute. Why is wickedness sitting in the place of authority? Then he looked where righteousness should be, and he says, wait a minute, that's become a place of iniquity. He's frustrated because the world has been flipped upside down. But notice what he says in verse 17. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. Friends, don't let your faith be challenged. Don't let your faith erode. Don't let your trust in God be affected by the world that's around us, because it will many times in our lifetimes feel like it's upside down. It won't always feel like it should be, and things aren't going to go in the directions and paths that we would like them to. Don't let that affect what you think about God in the process. Don't think that somehow God has abandoned the world or left it completely empty without any ability to get to Him just because the world doesn't look like it once did. For any and all who will seek Him, Acts chapter 17. For those who will fear Him, He's available. Will always be available until He determines that this world will no longer stand. God will ultimately judge when this world feels upside down and sideways. Don't let that affect how you and I think about God the Creator. Don't let it manipulate and even cause us to think that we have to abandon what we know to be true, pages of God's Word, because the world has changed around us. Jump to chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes, verse 1. Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there's power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praise the dead. Can you imagine the writer of Ecclesiastes looking at his world and feeling like it was so dark that he felt that people that were already gone from this world were better off than the ones that were living in it? Now that sounds pretty dark, but that's what he says. More than the living who are still alive, yet better than both is he who has never existed. You talk about deep frustration. The dead are better off than the living, and the one who's better than both of them is the one that doesn't come into existence at all. That's how frustrated he is with the world he lives in. Better the one who has never seen the evil work that is done under the sun. You and I may feel that way some days. We might not verbalize it in the exact same way that the writer of Ecclesiastes does, but there may be times in our lives where we just feel like that's what's ruling the world. Darkness has won. Evil has won. But the sentiment of the writer is his personal feeling about the circumstance, not the reality of what God can do in that environment. When we feel like the world is upside down, and we even feel as desperate as this man that writes Ecclesiastes for us, who I believe is Solomon, but we can debate that later. Those are the times to reinvigorate our faith and our confidence in the great Creator of all things. Because there is a coming justice. We read that in verse 17 of chapter 3. Notice what the Roman writer Paul says in Romans chapter 12 and verse 19. There is justice coming. We may not feel like it's happening now. We might feel like the oppressors have all the power, and there are those that are creating evil things in our world that don't seem to be hindered by that process whatsoever, and that somehow nothing's ever going to be able to be done. But ultimately, God can bring justice. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves. I'm going to reread that because I don't know that I want you to pause, because I want you to think about that. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Can I ask you to back up a couple of verses and appreciate with me why he said that? Notice what else he says. I could let's go to verse 17. I should have put it on the chart. He says, repay no one evil for evil. And then he listed 45 clauses that makes that not true. I got some eyes. No, he doesn't do that, does he? There's no qualifiers, right? There's no qualifiers. He just says it. Repay no one evil for evil. I don't care what this world does or becomes, friends. You and I have been never given license by God to treat others with evil because they've treated us with evil. We have never been given permission to act in evil ways and behave in evil ways and behave in spiteful ways and behave in hurtful ways because we feel like that's what the world deserves. Never in all of Scripture do I know of where that's been given to us personally. Rather, he says, repay no one evil for evil, have regard for good things in the sight of all men. You mean among all those evil people in this world? Yes. Yes. That's exactly what he's saying, actually. It's not just part of what he's saying, it is what he's saying. Repay no one evil for evil. That's what faith leads me to. It leads me to appreciate that even in an evil world, even in an upside-down world, even in a world that seems to be filled with nothing that is interested in what is right in the eyes of God, I am still commanded to regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Everybody. Again, he doesn't give any qualifiers to that. And friends, may I suggest to you that sometimes I'm convinced that we weaken our faith in ways that we don't even realize we're doing it. We weaken our faith by giving evil for evil. We weaken our faith by not entreating all men with good things. We weaken. We're not strengthening our faith. I'm convinced sometimes, and I'm trying to be careful and not judgmental of folks, but I think sometimes we almost think that we're greater people of faith. I told that guy I'm a greater man of faith. Well, if he needs to know something is sinful, then by all means, please, right? That's. But no, sometimes it's I told him, boy, I got him. And we're weakening our faith every moment of the way. Why? Well, because I'm rendering evil for evil. I'm trying to entreat others with the same evil that I think that they're portraying to me. No, do good. Do good means to share the truth of God's Word. Do good means to examine behaviors that are sin. All that's true. But how much energy have I put in living peaceable with all men? All of these things are parts of our walk of faith. You don't avenge yourselves, he said in verse 19, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. If I spend every waking moment of my day being frustrated about the sins of this world and finding ways that I might bring retribution to what seems like unjust actions by others, I am going to weaken my faith every step of the way. And all I will do will deepen my frustration and difficulties. And you're not going to be able to right every wrong. You are not going to be able to bring justice to every situation. You're not going to be able to convince everyone to live by the standard and precepts of God. You are not going to be able to convince everyone in this world. In fact, I am convinced that many times we are casting pearls before swine and we don't even think anything of it. We just keep doing it because we feel like that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to be able to bring justice to an evil and oppressive and sinful but God can. So I'll leave it to Him. My job in the equation as a man of faith is to do good unto all men. My job is to live peaceably with all men. My job in maintaining my integrity of faith is to look at a dark and sad world, share the message of salvation and hope and promise in Jesus Christ, share the will of God as it relates to choices and decisions that we need to be making as it relates to sinful things, But my job isn't to try to bring justice to the world. That's God's job. My job isn't to try to right every wrong, because all that does will just drag me down, because all what happened is I'll feel like, well, That didn't work. Then I'll try it. No, that didn't work. There's a time for justice. Don't let your faith ever convince you otherwise. God will deal with it. And I'm okay with that. My faith is okay with that. That someday God will address all of these things. There's more I could have shared. I'm not going to share it. Another time. I want us to appreciate this morning the beauty of the faith that God has extended, allows for each of us to experience if we'll build our relationship in God the right ways. I think sometimes we allow for our faith to be weakened and challenged because we're letting the world affect our faith when the world should never affect our faith. God is the one, right? That's where faith is built. World doesn't have any choice or say or any connected to. My faith should never be affected by the world in which we live. My faith should never be affected by the seasons in which we experience because they come and go. My faith should only be affected by the constant in all of that, and the constant in all of that is God. And so will that be my choice? Will I say, I will be determined in my faith to God because He's the consistent one in the picture? Can we help you today step into those promises? Can we encourage you to think about spiritual things today and make choices that will lead you to a walk of faith and relationship with the Father? I can't promise you that the world will make that easy. In fact, I think I could probably almost promise you the opposite, that the world will not make that easy for you. But I can promise you this, it'll be beneficial. And it'll have eternal benefit that you can't have otherwise. And that if I'll maintain an integrity of faith, if I'll commit myself to that relationship with the Father, then those seasons that are coming, irregardless, by the way, those seasons that are coming, whether I'm faithful to God or not, but I'll have a constant in my life that will guide me through it. And so will you commit yourself to Him today? Can we help you in doing that? Find remission of sins through baptism today, or to restore your relationship with the Father. How can we encourage you? Pray for you today. If there's something we can do, let God deliver you from all that is challenging you today through His Son. Won't you come while we stand and